Bom dia.
Bom dia, tudo bem?
Tudo bem, Felipe?
Tudo certo.
Tudo jóia. Eu vou só ver se eu consigo mudar aqui o background aqui, só um instantinho. Tá, só um instantinho. Mas então, Felipe, eu vou participar aqui e daí você pode, o Thomas pode só dizer que o Atílio não vai poder participar, tal, que eu vou participar no lugar e daí no final, me deixe por último, mas no final eu só faço algum comentário sobre o que os outros caras falaram, tal, se for o caso, ou falo aí do Ciarb aí como uma plataforma para essas coisas,
Melhor
só
porque a
para
gente...
só para ocupar o espaço. E daí, com relação à Ana, eu acho que basta ele dizer que ela teve um problema pessoal aí, não vai poder participar, e pronto. Porque o problema, a questão principal lá da Ana era justamente
preencher a
especialmente,
cota.
especialmente o flyer, assim, não ter tanta, não deixar de ter o número necessário de mulheres. Então não tem problema de ela agora ter tido uma dificuldade de não participar. Até porque a gente, mesmo sem ela, já estava bem pertinho ali da
De
meta.
atingir a cota, né?
É.
Eu tinha combinado com o Thomas para fazer as falas na ordem que está no material de divulgação.
Uhum. Tá, não tem problema, mas só me coloque no final, porque como eu não ia falar mesmo, daí então vocês só pulam o atilho e eu entro no fim, para não atrapalhar ali a programação. E eu também não tenho nada preparado assim para falar, né? Então não ia fazer muito sentido assim eu ficar falando exatamente no lugar dele, porque ele ia falar porque é uma empresa importante, etc. Não tem muita. Deixa eu só ver se isso aqui funciona. Peraí. Tá, eu acho que assim dá, né? Aparece bem o Ciarb ali.
Aparece bem.
Tá, tá joia. Esse negócio é meio esquisito porque dá uma cortada na cabeça, né? Fica assim,
Dependendo de
esse
como tá,
fundo,
isso acontece mesmo.
é, fica ali um negócio meio estranho, mas tudo bem. Eu acho que assim funciona bem, pelo menos aparece bem a marca ali e tal. Tá, eu só vou mudar uma coisa aqui.
Eu não sabia que a Flávia ela era poetisa também.
A Flávia?
Sim.
A Flávia é advogada?
É?
Flávia Rocha Loures? Eu não sabia também.
Ela tem um perfil no Instagram que é só poesias que ela escreve, cara. Muito legal.
Olha só, eu não tinha nem ideia. Eu sei que ela é de Curitiba, né? Ela mora aqui em São Paulo, mas ela é de Curitiba. E, e eu conheço o pai dela lá de Curitiba. O pai dela é um advogado e é ligado lá a uma família que foi que é de uma empresa que foi a primeira cliente do nosso escritório quando o Marçal abriu o escritório. E então então é uma família com que a gente sempre teve muito contato, e tal. E o pai dela, eu acho que foi inclusive meu examinador no meu exame de ordem,
Cara,
quando era. Então, assim, é uma família bem conhecida lá. E ela trabalha no mesmo escritório em que a minha mulher trabalha, que é o Milaré. E como a Flávia fez doutorado na China, a atuação dela é basicamente em direito ambiental internacional, assim. Então eu achei que era bem adequado mesmo que ela falasse. Daí, por sorte, deu certo dela encaixar lá com umas outras coisas que ela tinha que fazer hoje. E daí, no fim, vai funcionar.
Mundo pequeno, né?
Ah, é. Não, isso aí é sempre assim. O Thomas eu conheci lá em, eu acho que quando quando a gente estava em Hong Kong, num desses visites aí, e eu acho que
Uhum.
ele tá, daí a gente acabou indo juntos para Tailândia,
Poxa,
porque a gente saiu de Hong Kong normalmente o pessoal ia para Hong Kong nessas competições e fazia alguma coisa depois, assim, né? E daí
isso.
eu estava com meu filho, fui para Tailândia e ele e uns amigos foram também. Daí eu conheci ele lá. Acho que ele estava até meio que em despedida de solteiro, alguma coisa assim, então, nessa época aí.
Pô, mas então faz
Tava para
tempo.
casa. Acho que deve ter sido lá por 2013, mais ou menos, não sei, mais ou menos isso.
Porque ele tá com a Ana já faz mais de 10 anos.
Hum,
Não? É,
não sei. Talvez não
não,
fosse isso,
menos
então.
de 10 anos, fazer menos de 10 anos. Porque
Oi,
o,
Flávia, tudo bem?
Hey, hi.
Tudo bem? Tudo certo?
Assim, bom dia, tudo bom?
Por enquanto a gente está só em português aqui, porque o pessoal que fala inglês não chegou ainda. Na verdade, eu acho que no nosso grupo aqui é só o Alex que fala um pouquinho só de português. Mas como o programa faz parte do Resist, ele mesmo que todo mundo falasse português, ele é projetado mesmo para esse público externo.
Legal.
Oi, Flávia, tudo bem?
Oi, tudo bom?
Tudo certo.
O Felipe estava me falando que você tem um site de poesia, eu não sabia.
Tenho.
É.
Não tenho acrescentado muita coisa ultimamente, essa Covid não me inspirou, mas eu tenho, é
Pois é,
meu outro
você tem visto, a Roberta até comentou, depois eu vi num outro livro, tem assim, umas análises agora de, desse efeito da pandemia assim, né, sobre a literatura. E daí eles comparam isso com o que aconteceu com a literatura na gripe espanhola. Né? Daí falam lá de umas coisas da Virginia Woolf tal, e a e outros autores da época lá que mais ou menos evitavam o tema, embora assim o tema da gripe espanhola, tal, das mortes, etc, estivesse subjacente ao que eles faziam, assim, né? E então é uma questão interessante essa do efeito desse momento assim sobre a literatura, até o o que você diz aí sobre a pandemia não ser muito inspiradora tem talvez um pouco a ver com isso. Assim.
eu até tinha vários, participo de concursos às vezes, então vários concursos aconteceram sobre, escreva sobre a Covid, que você estava sentindo, mas para mim realmente foi o efeito contrário. Eu acho que eu preciso de estímulo assim para escrever, e essa trancada em casa, assim, para poesia 2020 acho que foi o pior ano da minha vida. Mas
Hum,
enfim, vou ver se 2021 melhora. Foi produtivo para o trabalho, então isso é bom.
é. Você é filha do Reinaldo, né?
Sou.
Eu estava comentando com o Felipe que o teu pai foi meu. Bom, ele foi sócio do Marçal, né? E a Nutrimental lá, do Rodrigo, etc., foi o primeiro cliente do Marçal quando eles abriram o escritório lá em 86. E o teu pai foi meu examinador no exame de ordem,
Ah, é?
em 92, eu acho.
Ah, que
E
legal.
a gente sempre teve bastante. Eu sempre tive muito contato com ele lá. Tem várias coisas lá do Didio. Né? O Didio é teu tio, né?
Meu tio.
Tem umas coisas lá do Didio que a gente atende ainda lá, daquelas empresas dele. A primeira vez que eu ouvi falar dessas coisas da China, etc., foi por causa do Didio. Por uns negócios eu acho que eram umas coisas de iluminação pública que eles estavam fazendo, e, tipo, eram uns equipamentos de iluminação pública, e daí eles contaram lá a respeito de como é que funcionava você montar uma fábrica, sei lá, isso aí nos anos 90, assim, montar uma fábrica na China para fazer lá esses equipamentos intermediários, assim, essas coisas. Ele dizia, não, você vai lá e o governo te pergunta por quanto tem que ser, quanto você quer que custe os teus insumos todos aí para poder produzir. Tem que ser $10. Então tá bom, então vai custar $10. A gente vai fazer aqui uma fábrica para produzir isso, vai custar para você $10. Então daí, com $10 você consegue vender lá no Brasil, consigo. Daí, então, isso aí era no início daquela zona econômica especial lá de Shenzhen, e eu acho que eles estavam justamente montando alguma coisa lá. Eu não me lembro, assim, eu acho, nem sei se isso aí foi para frente, mas a primeira vez que eu ouvi falar dessa estruturação assim, de coisas na China foi através deles, né? A gente tem um vínculo bem, bem forte lá com a tua família.
Legal, sabe? Legal. E você, eu nem sei como que você e o Roberto se conheceram, porque você é curitibano, né?
Não, pois é, a Roberta escreveu em 2015 para um livro que eu organizei, junto com um outro advogado lá do escritório. E daí eu conheci a Roberta no lançamento do livro, porque quem tinha convidado foi outro cara. Daí a Roberta tinha se separado em 2015, eu também. Daí, no lançamento do livro, a Roberta foi bem na época de Mariana, lá da Vale. Então, a Roberta estava trabalhando muito nisso. Daí, chegou atrasada pro lançamento. Tipo, o lançamento era às 7, ela chegou umas 9h30. Já estava todo meio assim e tal. Daí, ela chegou toda esbafurida. Daí, eu perguntei para alguém lá quem que era, tal. Daí, era uma amiga minha. Daí, ela falou, não, Roberta, escreveu um livro de vocês aí. Daí foi. Saiu uns dias depois.
Legal.
Doutora Luísa, e aí, como é que está?
Tudo bem, gente? Está começando a clarear agora aqui. Eu estava no escuro até agora um pouco.
Estudando a noite inteira.
Pois é, não estou virada aqui. Não, mentira, gente. Eu dormi, mas eu acordei mais cedo do que o normal. Estava escuro, muito escuro. Mas está tudo certinho por aqui.
Que bom. E como é que estão as coisas aí? Você já conseguiu tomar vacina? Ou como é que está a organização aí?
Ainda não, mas eu devo conseguir em breve. Assim, algumas pessoas da minha sala já conseguiram. Está sendo meio aleatório. Eles estão chamando alguns alunos quando sobra desses que são prioridade, porque tem aquela questão de fração de dose aqui, né?
Aqui também dá para você fazer isso, só que mesmo assim, eu fui ver isso aí ontem, mesmo assim é para idosos que ainda não chegaram na idade, ou para profissionais de saúde que estão abaixo da idade.
Entendi.
Então então assim, tipo professor de educação física, fisioterapeuta, esses caras assim que não tomaram ainda.
Agora, aqui que teve aquela temporada de iniciação, de fraternidade, sororidades, etc. e tal, teve um pico de números positivos, assim, de pessoas testadas positivas em undergrads, né? As pessoas da graduação, 90% homens do primeiro ao segundo ano da faculdade, assim. Tudo daí eles conseguiram trace para as festas de fraternidade, assim. Então...
aqui foi o carnaval, né? E o que até me surpreendeu um pouco, assim, porque aumentou o número em Curitiba, supostamente por causa do carnaval. Eu nem sabia que tinha carnaval em Curitiba. Eu acho que deve ter sido porque o pessoal não viajou, né? Daí deve ter ficado lá. Porque...
Pois é.
Não, mas aqui o carnaval foi cancelado também. O povo que não respeitou.
Mas então... para ser diferente, tinha que ter tido carnaval em Curitiba, né? Já é assim, naturalmente cancelado.
É verdade. César, vocês conseguem me ouvir bem? Porque eu tive que usar
Não, tá perfeitamente. Tá perfeito, sem problema. Tomás, tudo bem?
César, tudo bem, César?
Tomás,
tudo certo.
Morning.
Por enquanto, o Alex não entrou, né? Que é o nosso English speaker aí. Até ele fala um pouco de português, mas de qualquer modo, como esse negócio aqui é vinculado ao Resist, ele vai ter que fazer em inglês mesmo. Mas...
Tá.
Então,
tudo bem,
Thomas,
Flávio?
o Felipe estava...
Oi.
Fala,
Eu não
Thomas,
sei se
beleza?
a Flávia e Luísa, talvez, desculpa, eu nem apresentei vocês, não sei se vocês já se conheciam, a Luísa é associada do nosso escritório, ela está fazendo LLM agora nos Estados Unidos, está na Duke, e a Flávia, Luísa, é advogada no escritório, no Milaré, né, advogada junto com a Roberta, e ela é especializada em direito ambiental internacional. Você fez doutorado na China, não foi, Flávia?
Então, com essa Covid, ainda falta eu defender a tese, então a defesa está pendente.
Mas então, diga.
Não, é porque eu vi aqui a lista das apresentações e eu estou lá para o final, mas eu tenho aquele problema do outro evento, né?
Eu acho
Se
que não tem
quiser,
problema. Você podia
Flávia, eu
até
estava
ser a
falando com o
primeira.
Thomas agora, porque eu acho que, enfim, eu pensei, eu não sei, a gente não tinha discutido uma ordem, eu até falei para o Thomas, talvez a gente colocar o pessoal que tem uma ligação mais direta com a China antes. O meu tema é um pouco mais genérico e até um pouco deslocado, assim. Talvez falar primeiro não seja tão atrativo. Eu tinha até falado com o Thomas, até para eu ver se eu consigo aproveitar algo de quem vier antes e incorporar na minha fala para dar um arzinho um pouco mais enviesado. Se você quiser
Bom dia,
trocar
Gustavo.
comigo, não tem
É,
problema nenhum. Ou simplesmente...
Tudo bem, bom
eu
dia,
acho que... tudo certo? Só para... Então, eu acho que vocês já podem ver aqui, o Gustavo, vocês já viram também lá nos e-mails, é da State Grid, ele foi diretor, eu acho que você foi diretor jurídico, agora você... qual é o teu cargo mesmo agora?
Não, agora eu sou gerente geral de contencioso da State Grid.
Gerente geral de contencioso. E então, nós já temos um contato até por outras empresas em que o Gustavo participou já há bastante tempo. E então, eu fiquei muito feliz aí que ele concordou em conversar conosco aqui sobre esses temas. Então, Gustavo, a gente estava falando aqui sobre a ordem. A Flávia tem um problema de um outro evento daqui a pouco. Então, acho que a gente vai mudar um pouco para ela falar no início.
Uhum.
E daí...
Sem problema.
Daí, então, eu acho que esse nosso painel ele é menos jurídico, né? Como a gente já tinha conversado, e ele tem, então, enfoques diferentes, assim, pretende ser uma conversa prática. Assim. Então, eu acho que a gente pode... em um outro painel que nós fizemos na segunda, nós fizemos uma série de exposições jurídicas e depois o pessoal in-house apresentou questões práticas que foram comentadas, assim, né, tipo dificuldades práticas. A gente pode talvez inverter um pouco as questões aqui e a Flávia pode falar sobre esse tema específico desses problemas ambientais, que são uma coisa que todo mundo vive, né? Certamente a State Grid vê isso na prática no Brasil e em outros lugares. E a gente pode, então, conversar depois da Flávia, com o Gustavo, com o Alex, que foi representante de comércio da República Tcheca no Brasil, e ele, agora de volta na República Tcheca, ele participou da organização do sistema de proteção de investimentos tchecos no exterior, por parte do governo da República Tcheca. Então, também é uma visão menos jurídica, assim, mais da preocupação das empresas, tal. E daí, a partir desses comentários de vocês, a Luísa e eu falamos sobre algumas questões talvez mais jurídicas. O Atílio não vai poder participar, né? Ele teve um problema. Então, eu acho que a gente vai...
Eu posso abordar um pouco das questões de empresas que estão vindo, que já estão no Brasil. Posso tratar alguma coisa assim, para complementar.
Tá certo. Não, eu acho que você Thomas, você é o moderador, você vai dirigindo as coisas. Eu não ia falar mesmo, então eu vou ficar só no final, só mais para ocupar lá o espaço da Tílio. E tem o Luiz Eduardo também, que daí fala nessa primeira parte antes da Luísa.
Então, César...
Eu acho que a primeira seria a Flávia, né,
a Flávia.
Tá? E daí eu acho que você pode ir seguindo a ordem aqui. Flávia, Alex, o Gustavo, Luiz Eduardo, depois a Luísa e eu.
Tá bom.
Gente, só porque a gente está com poucos minutinhos aqui, eu vou só buscar um copo d'água e já volto.
Tá.
Pessoal, já atualizei a lista ali de palestrantes, tá? Eu vou fechar minha câmera daqui a pouco e em 3 minutos eu vou abrir para transmissão no link lá do YouTube do Ibrachina. Se vocês quiserem pegar uma água, um café, alguma coisa, agora é o momento.
Tá,
César, uma dúvida muito importante. A exposição vai ser em inglês?
Em inglês,
Certo.
Tá, porque a gente está esperando o Alex entrar, mas ele...
Eu acho que todos que estamos aqui somos brasileiros, né? A não ser...
É que o evento, de qualquer modo, ele é dirigido lá ao Visist, né? Então ele foi anunciado lá para os participantes do Visist e tal, e a gente espera ter participantes lá do negócio. Justamente, ele é um coquetel virtual no horário de Hong Kong, né? Ele começa às 8 da noite de Hong Kong. Para a gente é tipo coquetel com água aqui, né?
Ou um cafezinho.
No máximo.
Qualquer coisa que vocês quiserem comentar, pode usar o bate-papo aqui, que eu vou estar atento. E esse bate-papo é só para os palestrantes, tá?
Hey, Alex, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, well, very well.
Okay, good. Should I take my, how do you call it, jacket? Because you have a jacket. I should have one too then.
Nah, that's okay. That's okay. I was at an arbitration hearing the other day, and so I was wearing a jacket without a tie. The arbitrators were like just wearing just shirts, and there was another counsel that was wearing a tie. And so at the beginning of the hearing, he said, "I have a point of order," and so he said, I would like to submit a request. May I take off my tie?" It's like, so,
okay, for the sake of equity.
Yes, the parity of arms. And well, so just to quickly introduce yourselves, Alex, as I was saying, was the trade representative of the Czech Republic in Brazil some time ago. Now he's back in the Czech Republic, and he was involved in the conception of a protection program for Czech investments abroad, and so that's very interesting for us to be able to discuss with him. Flavia is an international environmental lawyer. Gustavo Guedes was the general counsel, and now he's the leading counsel in charge of litigation for State Grid in Brazil, the Chinese energy company. Luisa Quintão is an associate at our firm. You probably have met her at the VIS here in Brazil. She's doing her LLM in the US at Duke University. Thomas Law is the chairman of Ibra China, the host of this event. And Felipe, that you see there, is also part of Ibra China. And so I guess we are all here now. And so
how about Luis Vidal? Cesar,
yeah, I don't know. Do you know, Thomas, if he's joining?
Yes.
Is he there already?
Check.
Yes, he
just entered.
See him now. Hi, Luis Eduardo. How are you doing?
Hi, hello. I'm fine. You?
Good.
Thank you.
So I think we're
Vidal
all...
is in Beijing now.
Yes.
Oh, you're in Beijing. So you're
the
you're the one that is really having a virtual cocktail right now, right? Because I'm having just water here, and Alex is probably around lunchtime. And,
without the lunch.
Yes. And so, well, but yeah, that's really cool that you were able to join. So we are. I think Thomas, if you want to just quickly explain what the order is going to be, then
okay.
okay.
So the order, Vidal, it will be like this: Flávia Rocha, Alex Ivanco, Gustavo Guedes, Luis Vidal, and then Luisa and Cesar.
Okay, so the idea is that well, Flavia has to leave early because that's why she's going to be the first. But the idea is for the people that are more connected with the real business to discuss some of the problems, and then at the end, Luisa and I will talk about some specific legal issues regarding Brazil. In Latin America, maybe, but the idea is to have some talk about real issues and not stay on the theoretical things. And it's supposed to be anyway a relaxed talk. It's we'll try to make it look like a cocktail. We're just not drinking.
Cesar, if I may just.
Wine, then.
Yes,
if
please.
I may, a quick question. It's more about commercial arbitration or investment arbitration?
Both. Whatever you think. Well, in Latin America, as you know, Brazil doesn't have investment arbitration, but it does have very strong commercial arbitration with the states. That's something that Luisa is going to talk about.
Okay,
and,
great.
But all the other Latin American countries do have investment arbitration, and so that is something that it would be very interesting for us to hear from you guys. How much of a difference does that make? Do foreign companies feel more confident investing in Peru because there is investment arbitration, or investing in Mexico, or investing or that doesn't matter when they make a decision on where to invest? So far, it hasn't mattered too much to Brazil, as far as we know. Right, but maybe that will change. I don't know. That's something that we would like to hear from you. Okay, Felipe,
okay.
Maybe we can go ahead.
Okay, I will start the transmission now. They will start. Okay, we are on.
Hello, everybody. I declare open our online seminar cocktail. And I would like, first of all, to congratulate the organization of the event, Professor Dr. Cesar Guimarães, the organization of East v. Smoot, and also the support of CAM-CCBC, and also our team from our institute, IBRA China. Our institute has the mission and the objective to promote the cultural integration between China and countries and regions that speak the Portuguese language. Founded in 2018, our headquarters is at Avenida Paulista, São Paulo, Brazil, and we provide lectures, workshops, exchanges, activities, and cultural events. So for today's theme, it's about investment of companies from Asia in Latin America, and also the role of dispute resolution to mitigate risks and promote a more adequate and secure environment. And to begin with this topic, we will call Professor, international lawyer, Flávia Rocha from Milaré Advogados to start. The floor is yours, Flávia, please.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me start by thanking you for the invitation. Very happy to be here, and with an apology because I'm going to have to leave early for another event. And also the flyer says International Environmental Law PhD, but that's actually my master's, and I'm still not done with the PhD. So just to be true to my credentials. So what I wanted to do today is have a very quick talk with you. And the main message that I wanted to convey is that as Asian companies invest and expand their activities overseas, they would benefit immensely from trying harder to identify and respond to local environmental concerns. Why? Because otherwise they risk facing increasing litigation, harming their credibility, and most of all, losing money. But there are also opportunities here to talk about. So to do that, I wanted to start with a quick case study. And if you're watching us and you're familiar with this case, let us know in the chat. And it's about an area in Kenya around a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Lamu Old Town. It's a lush mangrove coast and plans by the country to build the first coal-fired power plant, at the time backed by 3 Chinese companies. So in 2013, the government proposes the plant, 1 gigawatt. In 2015, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, ICBC, commits $900 million of export credit, and 2 state-owned companies in China plan to build and operate the plant. As soon as the news comes out, local communities and environmental activists start demonstrating. UNESCO and IUCN call on Kenya to dig a little deeper into the potential impacts. Environmentalists also lobbied Chinese investors. They post messages on their social media channels, write several open letters, protest at the bank's office and the Chinese embassy in Nairobi, eventually even meet with the Chinese ambassador. In 2016, a coalition of civil groups filed a lawsuit, but still the competent licensing agency issues the permit for the project. Then in 2019, against all odds, the tribunal issues a decision canceling the permit. So, and the decision is quite interesting because it affirms that the environmental and social impact statement had failed to adequately consider pollution from the plant and its negative impacts on the ecosystems and the people from the island. Finds that public participation had been insufficient, and very interestingly underscores that because it was a coal plant, climate change assessment should have been an intrinsic part of the impact assessment. And the lack of that climate change assessment made the report inadequate and insufficient. So basically tossing the report. After this, major financiers that were behind the project, including the Bank of China, end up pulling out. In 2020, the Kenya government ends up canceling the project, not knowing if other banks would step in. And this is not an isolated case, right? So in 2018, an Ecuadorian court ordered a Chinese private corporation to suspend gold and silver mining in a nature reserve. So that gives us pause, right? What's going on here? There are some lessons from these 2 stories and other stories, other similar stories like this. So first, it's of course risky investing in environmentally damaging projects without considering local community concerns or that lack community support. And nowadays in most places, not everywhere, but in most places, just an agreement between government and business is no longer sufficient to guarantee that a project will go forward. And stories like this are multiplying. There are more precedents that I could talk about. So it would be wise for Asian companies investing abroad, including in Latin America, to improve public communication and open channels to the local community and release more transparency to release more information. And also experts point out, specifically going into the legal field, to issue stricter regulations to supervise those overseas investments. So power to punish breaches, eventually a dedicated foreign investment law, and to keep these investments that are ongoing constantly under review to see if the projected impacts are not becoming more problematic than initially predicted. So that was the part about the risks. Let's talk a little bit about opportunities. So what we know, focusing a little bit in China, because that's a lot of my background. I lived there for 5 years. So we know that China has made much progress in the last few years, but fossil fuels still account for 85% of energy consumption in China. At the same time, we have this new carbon neutrality commitment by 2016. We also know that China is interested in being viewed as a responsible global actor and a provider of global public goods, and is also keen on expanding renewables, both domestically and abroad. Some examples to illustrate this point: the concept of, or the vision of ecological civilization. It's a political message largely directed at domestic audiences, but it's also deeply rooted in Chinese culture and traditions. So it should also be embedded in how China behaves abroad. And this is also the theme, eco-civilization is also the theme of the upcoming CBD COP, Conference of the Parties. It's the world's most important conference on on biodiversity under the auspices of the UN. And it's not just any COP, it's happening in China, and it's the COP where countries are supposed to adopt the new strategic plan, the Global Biodiversity Framework, a 10-year period that is crucial for humanity to change how we relate to nature. And so China is at the heart of this process. The 5-year plans that China has been issuing since 1953 and are at the core of China's planning, right? Social and economic development. So the 13th was the first to set clear sustainability goals and direction, which interestingly, most of those goals had been achieved by the end of 2020. And now the just released 5-year plan 14, which comes with a mixed picture. So among other goals, they plan to increase renewable share to 20% of energy mix. Now it's around 16%. The plan contains multiple references to development of coal and other fossil fuels, albeit under the condition of clean and efficient. But interestingly, green development as strategic priority and environmental themes are integrated throughout and include some modern topics of environmental management like nature-based solutions and payment for ecosystem services. So what do I conclude from this picture? China already is and will continue to be a leader, has to be, because it's still facing problems in the field of climate change and environment. And it has a wealth of experience and will build more of expertise and technology to share here with us through investments, exchanges, and partnerships. So these were the opportunities. And now the last point I wanted to make about Brazil, my country, so a little bit of our homework. What are we doing to create an enabling environment for these investments, for these companies to feel more comfortable to come here? So we've been working hard to do that, work in that direction. Some examples, and probably other speakers will cover that as well. For 2021, there's an interesting pipeline of public infrastructure projects, and for which private sector partnership and foreign investment will be crucial, especially on transport, logistics, and environmental sanitation, but not only. Also, a set of new legislation adopted. So 2018, a little known decree that establishes guidelines about communities and human rights, including environmental aspects, that basically translates the UN principles to our legal system. In 2020, we had the overhaul of our environmental legal framework, and that covers water supply, sanitation, wastewater, solid waste, and urban drainage. That is opening lots of opportunities for investment. And also in 2020, two important decrees, one creating the Federal Development Strategy, the second, the Interministerial Committee for Infrastructure Planning, and the long-term integrated infrastructure plan that creates a solid starting point for investors to know what are the upcoming priorities and opportunities for us here. There are also several key environmental bills under discussions and other kinds of bills too, more market direct bills, but my area is environment, so I'll focus on those. So on environment, licensing, railways, oil and gas, and electric power. And the final homework that we've been working on is a revitalized partnerships and investments program, which is presided by our Minister of Economy. So it coordinates, it does several things, but most importantly, it coordinates with environmental licensing agencies to optimize the process for priority projects while ensuring compliance and promoting best practice standards. It also coordinates with private sector and foreign investors to ensure projects submitted are well-structured and internally well-governed. The portfolio now includes development projects across multiple sectors, but also, that was interesting to me, national parks and forest concessions, because this is also an area prioritized by China in the latest 5-year plan. So could possibly lead to lessons and experience to apply here. So in closing, there are risks, there are opportunities, but I think overall, this is a moment of opportunities in Brazil. Of course, with COVID, things become a little bit uncertain, but China is doing its homework. Brazil also, both countries could always do more, obviously. But the seeds are being planted to allow for these investments that support social and economic development and advance environmental goals as well. So yeah, I think that's my overall message. Thank you.
Thank you, Flavia. I really liked what you said about companies to feel comfortable about the environment in Brazil. I've talked to XCMG. It's the big company in Minas Gerais. They are a manufacturer of agriculture machinery in China, but they are in Brazil for a long time now. But one of the CEO, Mr. Wong, he told me that one of the problems when they came to Brazil was the environmental license. They had to have this environmental license like for several years to have this license. So that was a big problem for the company. And I think if we try to work with companies to feel secure coming to Brazil, it would be we would open more gates for new companies to Brazil and Latin America. Our second panelist
Thomas,
yes.
Sorry, can I ask Flavia a quick question? She said that she has to leave, and so before she does, Flavia, you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting. I'd like to ask you a follow-up question on that, and that is, if I understood it correctly, the possible role of governments to, in a way, oversee the way their companies abroad comply and cooperate with environmental goals and guidelines and rules. And in that made me think of a possible parallel with what happens with bribery. As you know, the FCPA, in line with OECD directives and a global concern about integrity and in those in compliance goals. The FCPA is the U.S. Law on foreign corrupt practices. The UK Bribery Act also, in the OECD guidelines in general, they make governments worry about how their companies comply with local laws and global guidelines banning corrupt practices. Do you see initiatives similar to that in environmental concerns? For instance, directing governments to worry about how their companies behave abroad, or maybe even governments being concerned about that, being aware of the fact that lack of compliance or lack of a cooperative behavior, a lack of awareness of all these local problems that you talked about will indeed lead to a frustration of investments abroad, and maybe damage, either damage the country's image, as you mentioned, or damage their economic interests in obtaining the outcomes that could be expected from those investments. And so, do you see? I don't know if I understood it correctly, but if that is a concern of yours, and if that's what you meant, do you see something practical being done about that? Governments that are concerned about that, or is there some global initiative similar to what the OECD has done with regard to compliance and corruption in terms of making governments take steps towards that type of oversight?
Governments have been doing this in two ways, either through legislation or safeguards, which more like guidelines that are not binding, but they expect their companies to comply. So France has a very progressive law dealing exactly with that subject matter, how French companies behave abroad in terms of environmental and social aspects. I don't have the number here, but I can share in the chat later or share with the group. China also has a set of safeguards. The problem there is that they're more general, don't go into details, and the government has not tried hard enough to see these guidelines applied by its companies when they're investing abroad. The EU also has some human rights violations that could include serious environmental damage systems, so for eventual sanctions. And I think OECD they have a guideline on corruption. I think they have one on environmental and social sustainability. I just don't remember the name, but it's targeting multinational companies so that they apply abroad the same high-level standards, because a lot of these European, American companies, they have very high, strict standards at home, and when they go abroad, it's not, they just decide, no, I'm just going to follow the national law, it's good enough. Canadians also have been in trouble because of that. So this OECD guideline targets multinational. The big principle there is to do this, to apply abroad as best practice standard, the same what in your country is already a legal standard, if in the country the legislation is not so demanding.
Flavia, I have also one more question. You talked about Asian companies releasing more information for the public sector. Do you think that before we had, like in the past, some Chinese companies that invested in Brazil, but more in sectors that they are not to the consumer, to the end of the consumer, but such as energy, for example. but now we have some companies that are coming to Brazil, such as Caoa Cherry, that are for cars, for the consumers. And now they're doing more of the marketing, the propaganda. We now have another Chinese company coming that is the Xiaomi for the cell phones. And they want to be the leaders of cell phones in Brazil, not only in Brazil, but I mean, they want to have this market here in Brazil. And also there's another Chinese company coming that's called Realme. It's also a telephone company. And they want to sell also the devices, the cell phone with 5G in Brazil. So do you think that there's a difference between the companies of the energy sector, different from the companies that are coming and they need to talk with the public? Or do you think all the Chinese companies or the Asian companies or other companies must talk to the public in general in Brazil?
Yeah, the point is where you have potential for environmental impacts and the local community becomes concerned. So of course, the type of activity, the dimension of the project will matter to say, yeah, companies should release more information. In general, transparency is a overarching standard, right? That it's being more and more promoted with the ESG concept and so on. So transparency in general, I think it's always a good thing, but specifically for environmental impacts and mitigation measures and the environmental licensing process, of course, it depends on the magnitude of the impact, the type of impact, and most of all, if it's going to have impacts on the community surrounding the project. So it doesn't have to be a blind requirement, although transparency, broadly speaking, is a good thing to have across all companies and sectors, I think.
Thank you, Flavia. Thank you. So our next panelist is a lawyer,
Thomas,
international
if I can
lawyer.
contribute.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, if I just can contribute on Ms. Flavia speech, the last project that we have on State Grid, it's one of Colossus projects. It's a big one, and it was not easy thing to do, but to boost the chronogram of the issuance of the environmental license by IBAMA, we should realize 12 public hearings along the route. I mean, in 5 states, we should provide 12 public hearings. Some of those regions, we decided to make more public hearings. And this was our decision. That was not IBAMA's decision. That was not the environmental public agency in Brazil decision. What make really close to the public, and of course to the cities that has any doubt about the project. So we provided more public hearings, and this was, I can affirm, the best solution that we have to have the better approach with the community. Of course that this is a challenge. Of course that this is, it means cost to the company, but it's a cost that we have to think that it is really an investment that makes our project really strong along the community itself.
Agree. It's true. Thank you, Gustavo.
Thank you, Gustavo. Does anybody has any other question for Flavia? Luisa? No? Okay, so let's, now it's Alex Ivanko. He's an international lawyer. He also worked for the Czech Trade Promotion Agency in São Paulo. Dr. Alex, please.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I don't know in which line you are, timeline. So maybe let me introduce me quickly. Yes, I have been involved with Czech companies trying to enter Brazilian market. I have been also involved in the Czech Ministry of Industry and Trade dealing with, let's say, protection of the Czech company's interest abroad. And as an academic, if I may now comment a little bit about what was presented. First, maybe let me come quickly to the topic that was opened by Cesar. I think the institution that you have been looking for is the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises that was adopted in 1976, I guess. So it's one of the oldest mechanisms that, let's say, sets standards for international companies when they move abroad. It was refurbished in 2011, so now it includes not only ecological protection, consumers protection, there are syndicate rights. So it's quite a broad and complex document. And what is most interesting, it's also binding on the governments. So in each country that adhere or is to these guidelines or it's member of OECD, there is a national contact point, which should actually be a place where you can raise some issues if you think that the international investor or the company is not respecting any of these rights. So there is also Brazilian national contact point. And actually, it's a place where you can at least talk about the topic and raise the issue, but it will be the public opinion that might be the punishment or enforceability on the company. So with this small bridge from the previous topic, I will continue to the new one. So I already mentioned that you might have some rules that are enforceable by the state, others that are just guidelines. But what is important also to see from the perspective of investor or a company that want to move abroad, it's how you are going to resolve your dispute. I'm sorry to say so, but I guess everybody already met a client that was not aware of a possible problem. So usually it's like marriage, everybody's happy. And when the problem arises, then you are thinking of what went wrong and where is your, let's say, contract. So first thing I always do is to look or to ask how you are going to resolve the dispute. Then, of course, the question might be what kind of business are you doing, or if you think that maybe government will be the one who might impede it, or it's only your local partner that might be the one who unfortunately will not hold his side of the deal. And then the question, as always, is what's your access to effective dispute resolution? So from this perspective, you might look for commercial arbitration, or you may look to investor-state dispute resolution. I guess that both of the ways are important, but it's a question of your business that should be the guidelines to what you are looking at. So maybe I will leave this for further questions, but just going in the way of facilitating investment. So this is something that the state can do without giving any promises to actually provide a binding dispute resolution for investors in its territory. So there is always a way how to look how to facilitate installment of an investment, or how to facilitate let's say, easiest way how to resolve a dispute that might arise from some bounding legal obligation that the company might be facing in the country. And this all will be a guidelines for the company to measure if and under which conditions they are going to enter the market. So I'm not sure if I should go more into these details, but let's say currently there are some discussions how to reform the ISDS system. So if you're interested, there is also Uncitral Working Group 3, which is now dealing with an establishment of a new international investment court, which should resolve a lot of the issues that have been felt and raised about investment state dispute resolution. So this is an interesting debate. If you want to follow it, all the informations are on the webpage. From other perspective, each state might have its own opinion. So there are some that are providing this kind of protection. I mean, to investment state dispute resolution. There might be others who would just try to establish a clear judicial dispute resolution in its territory. And you should actually measure if this is something that from the historic point of view gives you an assurance that is enough, let's say, for your investment. And the third option, which I think is the one that is relevant, it's the commercial arbitration, which can also be settled in a way that, or arranged in a way that it will not, it will be independent from the state that you are going to invest or where you are having your commercial contracts. I just made a let's say introduction, so I'm happy to accept any questions because I'm not sure what might be of the most interest to you. And I will stop myself here and give you the floor. Thomas, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I'll pass to Cesar, please, Professor Cesar.
Yeah, I just have a question here. I don't know if that was the idea now, but I don't know. Well, Alex, first of all, thank you for your insights. It's very interesting to hear from somebody who has this as a very practical experience in foreign investments, especially in Latin America. To hear this experience that you share here with us. And I don't know if you are familiar, you probably so, with the approach that the Brazilian government has been taking lately with regard to foreign investment protections. We, as you know, Brazil is not a signatory of the Washington Convention. We don't have investor-state arbitration for protection of investments that are not covered by a contract with the Brazilian government. But on the other hand, we do have, and I'm not going to jump Luisa's topic here, but we do have very strong commercial arbitration with the state based on contracts, right? But more recently, Brazil has been implementing some new types of investment cooperation treaties that are not really BITs and do not really provide for investment arbitration, investment treaty arbitration as such, but they do provide for state-to-state arbitration, and they provide for more streamlined and structured negotiation process with focal points in both states that have to get together and try to avoid disputes in a way. Are you? What is your view on that? Do you think that is something that will be seen by foreign investors as an actual improvement in the protection of their investments in Brazil, or it doesn't really make a difference? It doesn't add very much to what Brazil had been offering beforehand as protection to foreign investors. Do you have a view on that?
Thank you, Cesar, for the question. I have many views. I'm just thinking of which one I'm going to share. I guess Mozambique and Angola was the first cases of this kind of new agreements. So of course I have been watching them, how they are evolving, and now I guess there are many more that already have been signed. First of all, it's always good to cooperate. So this is very good news. I think ombudsman or this kind of facilitation is always welcome from the side of investor, because there is somebody who can walk you through all the requirements that the government might impose. There are also some very good options for standard setting or experience sharing for example, Brazil can share its opinion on energy regulation with some of the countries, or they might discuss other cooperation within this framework. But at the end, you should also ask the question, what would happen if something goes wrong? So I'm getting back to this idea. I'm a bit crazy about it, but imagine that you are a small company that have an issue within this relationship. How important is your investment for the, let's say, your government? Will they raise the issue with their colleagues? Will they start a state-to-state dispute resolution because of your issue? Or would you rather welcome your own decision if you want to start investment state arbitration, or if you are protected by a commercial arbitration clause? So this is something that have to be, let's say, thought over carefully from the side of the investor. But just to give you a good hope or sign for the future, I guess I know there are good negotiations in WTO about investment facilitation. And of course, Brazil is very active. So this approach is always welcomed and maybe always useful. So why not to work also on this? And just keep in mind that there might be some defaults. And if you have your own money, if you are the company, you should think twice if this is really giving you the adequate protection that you are seeking. And if not, you will maybe look for some other means how to protect your investment or the cooperation that you are having with local companies. Is this answering your questions? I'm happy for more.
Thank you.
Alex, I have a question. You talked about the Uncentral Group 3, and they are dealing with the new investment courts. Do you know if there are Brazilian lawyers participating to the discussion of this group?
There is always a representative of Brazil, of course. So you have to reach your government and ask. I'm not aware of I cannot give you share the contacts. I might ask for it, but I think you can receive them too. Important thing is there is a longer discussion going on this topic. So hopefully there will be some results soon. And I guess this is an opportunity how to tackle this issue globally, and Uncentral is one of the best places where to do it. So there are many questions that are being debated. Depending what you are interested in, there is always the way how to jump in and give your point or share your thoughts about it with your government or with the platform, because there are some venues how to join it.
Thank you, Alex. If somebody has any questions to Alex, Gustavo, Dr. Luis Vidal.
Maybe if I'm still in my time, or if you need more time, I will be happy to say you goodbye. But let's say that if we are talking to the young arbiters, I have to just encourage their, let's say, way of life. I think to resolve disputes, it's something that it's very helpful, because there will be always disputes. So if you understand how this works, it also means that you understand how you can prevent disputes and how you can find some mutual beneficial solutions. So this is something important, but you always have to be the one who make bridges or try to find them. And it's not always about fight or about being the better and having a prevailing view or prevailing idea. It's about helping your client to realize its dreams or realize its projects. And this, I think it's very important to keep in mind, that you are not just a fighter that should fight for your client, but to look for his interest, which might really always be just to win.
Thank you, Alex. I think that's very much in line with what Flavia was saying before about this need to engage with local communities, and actually Gustavo gave some testimony about that as well. It's a very interesting message, and I would just like to take advantage of your time here with us just to ask you something else. And I'm not sure if you are able to share that insight also with us here. And of course, if you can't, you will say so. But I was curious about how important, how decisive it is really for a foreign company to have access to investor-state arbitration in the pure sense of treaty arbitration, ICSID type arbitration, the one you were saying, the one that an investor has complete control over. When a foreign investor is making the decision whether to invest or not, we have traditionally seen in Brazil a steady flow of foreign investment, regardless of offering that type of protection for foreign investors. And we have always relied on the fact that we in Brazil have an independent judiciary, more recently an active arbitration system, and also a large economy that is attractive to foreign investors anyway. So does that really, in your view, and if you are able to share that with us, does it really make a difference? Does it make sense to worry so much about investor-state arbitration, or can we rely on other types of protections that will be just as satisfactory for an investor, provided that other more important elements are there in terms of, for instance, economic stability or other factors that may have more weight on that decision in comparison with the availability of treaty arbitration. So can you comment on that as much as you are able to?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Okay, first of all, for the numbers, it's very specific and very difficult. So I haven't yet seen a very conclusive study that would give specific answers to your questions, meaning if there is a correlation between ISDS and investment. But of course, depending on the type of investment that you are trying to make, it might be interesting for you to calculate the risks. And of course, the longer you are planning to have your investment, the longer time you have for a potential risk to materialize. So it would, let's say, you would have to calculate your investment in a way that it's more profitable for you, because you have to bring in the risk of potential issues that might happen in that time period. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but let's say this is the economical point of view. And then, of course, you should have a different one as a citizen, as a lawyer. You should ask yourself if the dispute resolution that your state is providing, it's effective and it's sufficient. Because as an investor, you are always, you should have access to the same rights like any other person from the country where you are investing. So this might also raise the issues of how the judiciary system is working. So if you think that everything is great and it's correct, then of course you can be confident that you should not need an investment state dispute resolution in your jurisdiction. But then again, ask a different question. If you are a patriot, how much you are willing to pay to correct any difficulties that your system is having. Because actually what would happen is that an international arbitration court will give you a fine, let's say it like this way, and hopefully the system will correct. So it's a way how to measure your system vis-a-vis an international standard, but there is a price to be paid. So you can also look on this as a measure how to correct the efficiency of the state. And as a citizen, you should always hope for the best. And that's it. Of course, from the perspective of state, it's just a commercial actor with a little bit more of powers. So Of course, there is always a possibility to play the game of strong hand, but this way would lead to all times of diplomatic protection and interventions and ways that escalate in a way that might not be beneficial, not only for trade, but also for the peace. And maybe it's good to have mechanisms how to resolve disputes without running to diplomatic protection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Alex, I have a doubt. I only know of the program, but I don't know the Arbitration and Mediation Center of the One Belt and One Road initiative. I think they have centers of arbitration dealing with infrastructure. Do you know something about this arbitration center? I think it's in some places of the world, Europe. They are dealing with the infrastructure, but they also have, like, for example, a mediation center to deal with this One Belt and One Road initiative from China.
I think this might be exactly the point where I should refrain from answering your question, but let me be a little bit more broad. Of course, when you try to look for an arbitration place for your dispute, you are looking for procedural rules that are closest to your needs. So it's important not to be forced to use a specific one, but to have a possibility to choose the one that is best for your needs. And from this perspective, the more international you get, the better. And of course, there are some arbitration centers with a long tradition, and but maybe a higher price. So it's always up to you what you are going to propose to your partner in the discussion, and if he's going to accept your proposal. The rest should be effectiveness and uphold of the basic principles of fair and equitable treatment, and whatever you think is important for your dispute resolution.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thomas, just a point here. There is a question on Q&A by Yuri, who's a fellow of the Chartered Institute, and maybe Alex and maybe later Luis Eduardo could address this. I don't know if you have seen it here, Alex and Luis Eduardo, but it deals with that ombudsman type of system, and it asks whether you know whether it has been used already, and especially because it comes from the Korean experience. And yeah, and so maybe if you have some information about whether it has been used at least in the context of Korea, and how it has been perceived by international investors. Do you have any information about that?
Let's say you need to be specific. So what are the powers of the ombudsman? Is he able to intervene or reverse a decision of your state institutions? Or is he just a facilitator of a discussion that you might have with your investment vis-a-vis the state organs, or institutions? So this might be the way how to measure how useful ombudsman is. And of course, nobody is willing to give unlimited powers to somebody who is maybe outside the system, maybe a part of a ministry. So from the definition, ombudsman would be more a facilitator, and depending on the culture also, and the importance that you give this institution, he might be more or less effective and helpful. So for example, if you would associate this position to the position of the highest, ministry or highest organ, then, and from this perspective, he will be trying to help you. This might be much more useful than just to have always an investment ombudsman in every ministry and every department and every regional state office, because this might be more frustrating than helping, really. So it's again about the detail and about the effectiveness of this person and the importance that the state is giving to the investment. Because if you want to show that you are really helping, the investor will know if you are helpful or not.
Thank you. Any comments, Luis Eduardo? Do you have any experience with this type of ombudsman and in this context?
Actually not. Regarding Brazil, I'm not even aware of a similar case where an ombudsman would be applied. And regarding Korean experience, I'm actually not familiar with. So I think I will stick with the comments from Alex, which further analysis on whether the limits of the ombudsman could be helpful or not, depending on the case, on the institution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Luis Vidal. Now for our next panelist, it's Dr. Gustavo Guedes. He's the leading counsel of State Grid. State Grid is a company already in Brazil. They have Gustavo knows better. They have an office here in São Paulo and also in Campinas. So Dr. Gustavo Guedes, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, and of course, good evening for Eastern friends. We're talking late at night, I believe, 9 o'clock in Hong Kong. So just to divide this information, Mr. Thomas, yeah, you're right. We have an office in São Paulo and Campinas, but this is, we are talking about State Grid Power, and that is connected with CPFL. And I work for a State Grid Brazil holding. This is the arm of transmission line in Brazil. Of course, that we divide really well those roles, and each one has very affirmative and assertive business, very autonomous, and of course that we have the same father in China, but down here in Brazil, we do, each one has its own role and its own business to care. First of all, I'd like to give a big thanks to China and of course you, Mr. Thomas, and my noble friend, Professor Dr. Cesar Pereira, for sure one of our top lawyers in Brazil, for the wonderful invitation. As you said, I'm the current litigation manager at State Grid Brazil Holding. The company is currently responsible for the public concession of 23 power transmission lines. I am the current president of the Transmission Line Committee at Brazilian Association for Environmental and Power Law. And I am an enthusiast associate of the recent created Brazil-China Committee of the Brazilian Bar Association of Rio de Janeiro, that I believe that Mr. Thomas is engaged as well. It is a pleasure to participate in such an important event in which we can dedicate to share ideas, share experience, and promote debates. So, in the last 10, 15 years, I believe, there has been a profound change in the behavior of international investment in Latin America. And here I can speak as a Brazilian citizen, of course. Before the massive investment came from the United States and some countries in Europe, today, and of course I'm talking about 10, 15 years, and I said, the foreign investment, especially in infrastructure, has come the most part, big chunk from China. The investments are huge. In the power sector, I can affirm, this is my sector, that only State Grid has invested more than $5 billion in the power sector. The majority of the Brazilian companies are exporting massively to China. For example, 79% of the solar production went to China in 2019. This last year, 2020, 72% of the production of soy went to China. No doubt, my friends, I believe that the East and especially China is the Brazil first trade partner. The numbers and the statistics show that. It is in the East where the main investor, capital in Brazil, comes from, and it is where we know Brazil can find workforce with the expertise to conduct big projects, such as the one associated with the operation of the largest transmission line project built 100% by Chinese company outside of China. I'm talking about Xingu-Rio transmission line that was just speaking and made my testimony with Ms. Flavia, that crossed 5 states in Brazil, from up north, Belém state, to south, Rio de Janeiro, and that I have the pleasure to work with and implement with record time. So in one of his presentations the last days, the renowned Brazilian professor of arbitration, Joaquim Muniz, of whom I profound admire and fan, remember, there is no doubt the 21st century is Chinese. By the way, he says, the last 2 millennia were Chinese, and the hegemony of Europeans and North America was just a hiccup within the millennia of Chinese strength. So the future is in the East, and we have to be ready for it. The Brazilians have to be ready for it. In this scenario, I think it's mandatory for Western to build bridges, as Mr. Ivan said, with the East in order to understand more about the legal system, about the culture, the difference that can bring us together, aiming to establish this stronger commercial relation. There are already a series of Brazilian lawyers building bridges with the East. And at this point, I highlight the close relation of CBMA, the Brazilian Center of Arbitration and Mediation, with CIETAC, the China International Economic and Trade Arbitration Commission, the newly created Brazil-China Committee of Brazilian Bar Association Rio, the increasing offering of courses by a great Brazilian school as Getúlio Vargas Foundation, where the great professor Evandro Carvalho is responsible for the China desk. And of course, the relevant work of Ibra China and events like these, promoted and headed by Mr. Professor Cesar. Getting to the point, when we have lots of investments, importation, exportations, and massive sale of commodities and goods, it is, of course, natural to have potential space for disputes to arise, which are largely dealt by arbitration institutes, especially due to the possibility to executing the award in another country, I believe. The arbitration today is for sure the most used method of dispute resolution in Brazil, the commercial arbitration, in spite of the growing scenario for the dispute panel, the dispute board, and the less used mediation. However, I can affirm it is still a challenge to explain to our Eastern colleagues, in my case, to my Chinese senior executives, that can take more than 2 years, especially if the statistics show that the arbitration lasts 2 years. From the major respect Brazilian chambers indicates length of not more than 2 years. So why this arbitration proceeding lasts more than 2 years? How to explain why, after a long time of international arbitration, for example, conducted in an international arbitration chamber, we have to validate or confirm the international award in the Superior Court of Justice, and with the possibility to rediscard parts of the award. This is a daily routine of challenge that we have with investors. I can tell, in the beginning of 2021, this year, our litigation team came across to the need to revisit the strategy of an arbitration proceeding that has already took 4 years with no effective result for our shareholders. So in this case, the arbitration was carried out in the lovely city of Paris, France, and the award was issued in 3 years and something. In April last year, 2020, we started the proceeding of validation of the 4 award, but passed almost a year, believe me. We're still waiting for its validation. And we just get to know that we're going to discuss it. So a challenge to explain to our investor why. I can tell, at best with profound optimism, the procedure will have a very final decision review in the first quarter of 2022. So almost 5 to 6 years to its determination, and not the 2 years statistically shared. We started to make a reflection about the arbitration and the methods of dispute resolution. I can tell it's true, the arbitration appears as an alternative for dispute resolution. The arbitration arises exactly as an alternative to the slowness of the Brazilian courts, especially for the resolution of sensitive disputes in infrastructure, for example, that needs a technical opinion. Lawsuits that demand proof production and evidence take an average 7 to 8 years. With the outbreak, I believe 10, 11 years. OCDE, as we are talking about, has issued yesterday a report indicating the need to improve efficiency in Brazilian courts. So this is quite like affirmative in order to make some improvement and boost our transparency in our court decision and length of the lawsuits. And another reflection is that more than a decade, arbitration is being seen as an important alternative for dispute resolution for infrastructure contracts. So, why so long? My senior executive asked me, still, he didn't say. Why rediscuss part of the award? Is there an alternative for arbitration proceeding? What would be today the best method of dispute resolution that could cross price, term, and legal certainty here in Brazil? Of course, we started to consider another type of methods. The dispute board panel come to be one of the option, but it is known that the dispute board emerges as an effective alternative for preventing dispute resolution. The so-called DB, as we can say here in Brazil, is based on contract signed between the parties. And just like the arbitration rules may vary according to the institution elected by the parties and the contract provisions. In this type of dispute, we share with our senior executive that a point of extreme relevance stands out. The performance of the contract is carried out at the same time of the DB reports are issued. So the board format follows the entire work as from the beginning, helping the parties to resolve conflicts related to the contract day by day, acting through periodic reports and routine visits to the work site. So by solving this bottleneck of need to manage proofs and documents and evidence out of time as the arbitration, members of DB are highly connected to the facts arising from the progress of the work, whereas the referees in arbitration, on the contrary, act on post-fact. Another point for the DB is that the Brazilian jurisprudence has been formed toward DB validation and efficiency. But after all internal reflection, and the DB pros and cons, above all, with regard to the daily monitoring of the work, in the production of always immediate proof and evidence, so to solve a conflict already at this birthplace, came the general question as to whether it would be time to replace arbitration by a DB or the methods of dispute resolution. The adoption of DB could bring greater comfort and predictability to the shareholder and efficiency as a solution to the challenge of contractual performance and document management routine. But are we really mature enough to deal with a conflict solution that, depending on the strategy or my contractual performance, and here I mean a poor performance, we could really choose to leave the conflict treatment at another time, that is, pushes it to the end of the contract, to even use it as a kind of trade-off? Are we mature to resolve the conflict immediately? We have the experts indicated to this dispute resolution method. How not to transform this DB into a preparatory machine of greater conflict? So am I mature to expose contract weakness and strengths in my performance from the beginning? So a challenge that it's my routine, and I believe that is the routine of a Brazilian lawyer, especially working for a foreign investor come from the East. The challenges are pretty much high, as the need of carrying day by day close to our Eastern colleagues. And this is the point and the message that I want to give, is that we need to construct and build strong bridges in which to get more knowledge on the Eastern legislation, the legal routine, understand how our Eastern colleagues deal with business, to make it strong and build together alternatives for the future that, of course, make our investor comfort to put money in our country and, of course, in Latin America. So my big thank, and that's it.
Thank you, Gustavo. I'll pass to Professor Cesar, please, Cesar.
Yes, thank you, Gustavo. This was very, very interesting and very enlightening. You know, this event here, this virtual cocktail, this webinar, is part of a series that we have been conducting this whole week. And yesterday, there was one that was done by CAMCCBC, the Arbitration Center, the arguably the largest in Brazil. And the focus was precisely on Brazil as a seat of arbitration. And many of the points that you made are go to a much broader problem and things that, for instance, what you said about dispute boards and how mature we are to be open about discussing contractual problems effectively from the beginning. Of course, you need to have I think mature is precisely the word. You need to have maturity on both sides to be able to discuss those things openly and not keep something or keep your guards high
Yes.
and try to protect your positions for a future dispute, right? Basically, the idea of a dispute board is to avoid and prevent disputes, not to be prepared for a future dispute. But anyway, that's a much bigger problem than what I was going to comment and ask you about. But at least with regard to the problem that you mentioned of having an arbitration abroad and then having to go through the recognition process and in enforcement and everything, how do you think foreign investors, not necessarily State Grid, but from your experience, foreign investors in general, view the idea of having Brazil as a seat of arbitration, as the place of arbitration? Because, of course, that having that avoids all the problem of the recognition process, right? You go straight to enforcement, and if recognition can become a problem, you can basically have with an arbitration in Brazil, you can have the same structure and even the same arbitrators in a way, and avoid this need for recognition afterwards. How do you see the foreign investors' view on this? Do you think it is true what the perception that we have, that foreign investors are becoming more comfortable with having arbitration placed in Brazil and therefore avoiding this hindrance of future recognition process, or do you still see resistance to that option?
So Cesar, just to one step back about it was a challenge to first of all explain why we don't have so much legal certainty with the length of the process. I think that this is something that that's the first challenge to explain, because we cannot control that. But getting to the point, I can affirm to you that my view on this matter is that the foreign investor is being day by day more comfortable with our arbitration chambers. I believe that as from 2018, we do not have more clauses that indicate an international chamber in our contracts. So I can speak by my team in my company that is 100% state-owned Chinese company. So we are not using more, and we got the comfort of our senior executive to use the Brazilian chamber. And in parallel, I believe that in the last 5 years, the Brazilian chambers became modernized and are acting per excellence, as I said. So I do believe that day by day, we're getting more confident on the use of these chambers, and by the use of it, and of course, getting more confident on the use, and of course not choosing for international arbitration. I do believe that the use of international arbitration is really for the investor that is a brand new investor in Brazil. So because of many doubts of the legal certainty of it, and many questions about our judicial courts and proceeding and the length of a lawsuit, they started to think about international chamber and in a type of hub. Believe me, Paris was not chosen because it was Paris. It was chosen because it is a hub between Rio de Janeiro and Beijing, and that's it. This is why it was chosen. And but past some years, this brand new investor becomes more confident, and of course, especially in terms of costs, and it's better to choose a Brazilian chamber. So there is no room to choose an international chamber. So I can say about my routine is that we are not using more clauses that indicate international chambers. What makes our work more comfortable in order to make the forecasts of a lawsuit.
Thank you. That's very good to know. And thank you for this testimony. Again, it's I guess it's something that we all involved in ADR in Brazil should be aware of, that we do need to get the word out there about the reliability of Brazilian arbitration institutions, and in how even an investor that has just come to Brazil or can rely on those institutions, or at least make that transition that you mentioned very quickly into knowing and relying on institutions and in the arbitration system in Brazil. Thank you. That was very interesting. And Thomas, back to you.
Thank you, Professor Cesar. Gustavo, I have a question. Like Professor Cesar mentioned, Brazil as a seat of arbitration. Do you think with this pandemic, with this virtual access in arbitration, in the future, we could use the international seat, and using this concept, we can go straight forward and enforce an arbitration award in any part of the world without going to Supreme STJ here in Brazil, without using the recognition problem here in Brazil, for example. because I think it's getting faster, the decisions. Everybody is using nowadays this Zoom meeting, Google meeting, and now they have in the IBA guidelines, if I'm not mistaken, like some guidelines for the virtual arbitration process. So do you think in the future we could, the internet will facilitate this recognition problem?
Thomas, here I have to be honest. This is a wish. This is a real wish, especially for the operators of law here in Brazil. With this routine installed, we could have more transparency in how to explain for foreign investors how long a lawsuit or a dispute can take. And today we are based on statistics that do not show the reality, as I spoke. So this is the main challenge. So this is a wish. But I do believe that it's going to be a reality by the time that we start to build these bridges along Eastern France, as an example. But today, of course, that we have an obstacle in our Brazilian law in order to do that. So this is not a short time proceeding, but I wish and I do believe that we're going to construct that in the next few years. So I'm an enthusiast of that, and as all the projects that are big in China, as you spoke, as the One Belt and Road that connect everyone. So why not push this same rationale for this type of issue, that is how to enforce an award without going to the Superior Court of Justice in order to validate that and reach the scenario that it's the worst one, is that I win, I have the award, but I'm not winning the case. So after 5 years of litigation, I win the case. I have the award. I show it on a very nice PPT presentation to my executives. But where is the money? Where is that? This is our main challenge. After 5-6 years, especially on sensitive period as we are facing, we cannot affirm that this company is not going to judicial recovery or bankruptcy. So I believe that answering your question very objective, this is a wish. I'm not sure that we're going to have that in a few years, but it's a wish.
Thank you, Gustavo. Dr. Luis Vidal, do you have any questions for Gustavo? Luisa, I saw your hand. I saw your hand, Luisa.
Yeah, I had a question before, but it was partially covered by what you and Cesar said. So I was actually a bit concerned because I tend to have a more optimistic view of how the arbitration legal framework in Brazil is very good for foreign investors. And you presented this concern that having the award recognized by the Superior Court of Justice poses issues. I'd just like to add a different perspective, is that if we were thinking of court judgments, the situation would be even worse. So for investors coming to Brazil, you always have to remind you that Brazil is a New York Convention jurisdiction. So the issues there you're going to be able to discuss at the Superior Court of Justice. We have an expert here, Thomas Law, did his master's degree on this issue, but they are going to be limited to formal aspects, and at most they're going to be referring to public policy issues. I know that can be tricky, and people usually can try and include anything in a public policy objection, but still, I still think that arbitration poses and presents a level of legal certainty that is higher than if you go to a foreign court and then try to enforce that in Brazil. So just bringing relative perspective, because part of my question was already covered by my colleagues. Thank you.
Yes, Joe. So just to complement that, I was talking with friend from the National Council of Justice, and in the same rationale in line with as I spoke, the arbitration is the to us is the best dispute resolution method that we can use, and that that comfort our executives minimum in order to have a good perspective on how to solve this dispute. So this friend of mine told me that this is the more reliable proceeding that we have, of course, and we have there's no way. Imagine that we have to wait 8 years or 10 years in order to have the first instance award on a regular court, and of course, that we know good or not a good expert on how to deal with sensitive case and big sensitive case in infrastructure. So I'm certain that, as I said, we are not mature in order to find another dispute resolution right now, and the arbitration is the way.
Thank you, Gustavo. So let's proceed to the next panelist. It's Dr. Luis Vidal. He's master in LLM Tsinghua University in Beijing, and he's also counsel of De Hang Law Firm in Beijing. Please, Luis Vidal.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Thomas. As you said, I'm a Brazilian lawyer who have been like dealing with China for the past 10 years, which 4 of which I'm doing directly from Beijing. So since I'm a foreign counsel in China, and considering the great amount of investments and business conducted between China and Brazil on the most different sectors, covering from industry to energy, agriculture, and big infrastructure development, which, as Gustavo just point out, it's Chinese investors and also Chinese EPC contractors sometimes conducting the construction of the infrastructure system, right? And which sometimes not only involve Chinese counterparts, as most of the times doesn't involve only Chinese counterparts, but potentially can end up to arbitration. And as Gustavo said, I kind of share a little bit of his pain as well here from China, because I have to deal with my clients and also explain to them why sometimes arbitration as being the most suitable mechanism for disputes and resolution, especially involving quite large amount of investments, is still not as effective or is still not solve the issue, and might also bring up to breaching the relationship, right, the business relationship. So regarding this, I guess I will focus my my brief speech here maybe on no matter if the arbitration seat is international or in China or abroad, or the enforcement award is going to be handled in China. I think it's maybe important to understand, for example, how mediation has been used as an alternative dispute mechanism here in China, and have been also successfully being handled within the administration procedures, and also how the arbitration award is actually enforced before Chinese courts. The enforcement point here in China, at least, I think is quite important to emphasize. I have seen many cases where misinformed foreign partners took in like wrong decision based on equally wrong assumptions on how Chinese legal system works, and this I'm referring for a potential arbitration, international arbitration award to be enforced against a Chinese company in China, right? So just as a quick example, once a distressed fund reached out to us with an arbitration award for our evaluation, whether it could be still be enforced or not before a Chinese court. This case, the original party who actually won the arbitration disputes had decided not to enforce the award under the wrong assumption that it would be impossible to execute it within China against a big Chinese SOE company at the time, the big oil state-owned company Sinopec. Unfortunately, for that specific case in that specific time, 5 years have been passed already since the award was issued, and therefore there is not was possible anymore to enforce the award. But considering examples like this, and also the speech brought by Gustavo on the difficulties to bring to the Chinese or the foreign investor the length of enforcement of an award in Brazil, either using chambers based in Brazil or international chambers, passing through the recognition procedure as the High Court, or even using DB as a possible mechanism to avoid the arbitration itself, is still and potentially cover less the cost, like with less costs than entering in an arbitration procedure. Here in China, we have been seeing mediation as a real mechanism that it's still, I believe, in its early beginning. Singapore Convention on Mediation, International Mediation, was just signed last year, if I'm not mistaken, or 2018, end of 2018. So I guess it's still on its early beginning, but I think it's something that China has been deeply involved with from its history. So can be a suitable way for in a big infrastructure development project for you to have a room where potential risks or potential issues can be amicably resolved. Mediation has been a part of Chinese culture for thousands of years. As China evolved from ancient past as like a feudal society to imperial system, reaching the republic, passing through the Cultural Revolution, and arriving at the present day, mediation has always been present and has always been internally in China effective disputes resolution mechanism, and it has been adapting this traditional mediation to the necessities of like modern day commerce, investments, social norms, and also the political systems. Like mediators are now much more than wise village elders or party bureaucrats or party departments from the past that were reached out to mediate conflicts before. In this sense, within the arbitration procedure here in China, we have arbitral mediation, which is conducted by the arbitral chamber within the arbitration procedure, where both parties wish to conciliate, or whether one part wishes to, and the other party's consent has been already obtained by the arbitration tribunal. In such case, the arbitration tribunal shall suspend the arbitration procedures and then start a mediation. The mediation procedures continues until, of course, the parties reach an agreement, or it stops when one party at least requests to abandon the mediation procedure and re-engage on the arbitration, or if the arbitration tribunal itself considers further conciliation efforts to be in vain, so arbitration can also be resumed. Many criticism has been offered to such system, arguing that the arbitrator may not be fully impartial to conduct mediation after having analyzed the evidence or hearing the parties' claims. But undoubtedly, the system have been working well to settle disputes before the Chinese arbitration centers. Maybe such success is due to the deep traditional presence of mediation in Chinese society. Mediation, as stated on the Singapore Convention as well, it's a voluntary procedure intended for the parties to amicably find a solution for a controversy, and has the main purpose, of course, to solve the issue, but still keep the business relationship among the parties. So preserving the relationship is also a very important characteristic of mediations, and among others, as confidentiality, the impartiality and the independence of the mediator, the total autonomy of the parties to enter and exit the mediation, and the equal treatment as the mediator should drop above the parties in an environment where orality and informality are crucial for the consensus building among the parties, right? So I guess if mediation can be in the future used to solve within the contracts, as a DB is currently being used, maybe also be a way to facilitate or to avoid further arbitrations or litigations, making a safer environment for the investors to invest. Of course, having a mediator who is a technical, has further knowledge not only on mediation techniques, but also, of course, on the hard car of the project, right? The area of the project is being conducted. And regarding the enforcement here in China, just to conclude, it's quite straightforward. The arbitration award enforced is directly to the intermediate level court, which from Brazil would be like a high court from the state level. It can be filed either on the headquarters of the defendant or where the property pursuit is located. But here in China, we divided in two kinds of arbitration awards: 100% domestic arbitration, and that means an arbitration conducted within China by a Chinese chamber, within Chinese parties, where the goods are located in China and the values and transaction is in RMB currency. This is 100% domestic mediation, and within these cases, the merit may be challenged in the Chinese court of law. However, if the arbitration has any kind of a foreign element or it's a foreign related dispute, the merit shall not be reviewed by the court. And by a foreign element is either parties are outside China, or it's an international arbitration award, or if the goods that or the property which is being claimed is outside China. For this, we have in China two phases of enforcement. One is recognition, which is done exactly on the same level of the intermediate level court, and if it's not recognized, then the Supreme Court have a final saying on that, and then the planned execution. On the recognition phase, basically is Article 5 for New York Convention, if it's not like publicly against public policy or ideological principles of the Chinese government, and execution is pretty straightforward and there's no right of appeal. It's like more enforcement order. So it's even at the enforcement here in China, also because Chinese court is not as big as Brazilian, is quite more effective in time, which makes, as Gustavo said again, quite hard to explain to Chinese investors why having a so time-consuming procedures in or ineffective procedures in Brazil, it's quite hard to give a plain explanation on that, or to at least before, when they're planning the investments, if this kind of a question arises, is also a pain for them to consider when putting millions and millions of dollars in a project, where if something goes wrong, which can be wrong, the way out is not so easy to be found. So it's thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Luis Vidal. It was excellent. But I have a question. You live in Beijing. With the new Chinese civil code, does it impact the contract law of 1999? Or also does it has an impact on the arbitration law that China has, like, for a long time ago? Is this new civil code, how does it impact the Chinese society nowadays?
The civil code was already established in China, but just the general principles of the civil code, right? So, and then we have like partial laws, like the contract law, or the other partial law. So now what China did is consolidated in one document, right? So it's quite similar when we have our new civil code on early 2000s, where many of the laws were absorbed in our civil code. I guess the civil code will change a lot of the mechanisms that were especially how the court would rule over the cases. Previously to the civil code, here in China was a mix between common law and a mix between civil law. So there was a lot of cases where you use like jurisprudence as the only way for the court ruling, and but how with the civil code this mechanism might change. It doesn't affect the civil procedure, not the enforcement of the arbitrations. I believe so, but I guess for local disputes, or how the judge would rule, we will be more in a more normative basis, rather than on the common uses of the society.
Thank you, Dr. Luis Vidal. Now we will head to Luisa
Thomas,
Quintão.
just a quick comment or
Yes.
in question here. I thought it was very interesting what you said, Luis Eduardo, about enforcement in China, because it's good to maybe clear some misconceptions or prejudices, right, about that, and it's good to know that you have a relatively optimistic view on that topic, right? And as you know, this is virtually based in Hong Kong, right? This is connected with the Viz East, and actually on Monday we had a talk about arbitration in Hong Kong. And I just had a quick question to you. In terms of enforcement, do you see a difference between enforcing an arbitral award rendered in Hong Kong or Macau, as opposed to an arbitral award rendered in another New York Convention jurisdiction? Is there a difference in that, or are those considered
Yes.
domestic awards? Are they not subject to the same type of recognition procedure? Can you just quickly touch on that topic, please?
Yes, sure. They are foreign or foreign-related awards, but the Hong Kong arrangements, the Macau arrangements, and the Taiwan arrangements, for example, is a different kind of arrangements. The only arrangement between mainland China and Hong Kong special administrative region is that the awards issued by a Hong Kong-based chamber, they are directly enforced. They don't even pass to the recognition phase. For the other awards from Macau, Taiwan, or other chambers raised abroad, they must pass to this recognition phase. And this recognition phase, despite being the same level where the judge will be enforcing, there is like, there was a case, I think in 2005, that the Supreme Court ruled that any kind of foreign or foreign-related arbitration award shall be immediately recognized, and for that matter, it starts the enforcement procedure. If you look to the past arbitrations, and very few of them, foreign or foreign-related, was not recognized, and then it starts automatic internal procedure, which even the counselors don't have access to, but it reaches the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has the final saying, either in recognizing or not recognizing the award. So in this sense, the recognition phase, yes, this exists, but because of this Supreme Court's understanding or opinions, it's actually a more formal procedure rather than they actually is going to be decided if not recognize the award. Normally, in this we can see from statistics from the past foreign-related arbitration enforced in China. It's almost an automatic enforcement, even because there is no record of a decision being made like we are going to this award is recognized, so therefore should be enforced. So even this phase is omitted in the procedure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now Luisa Quintão, she's an international lawyer, master's in book, and nowadays in the US doing her LLM. Luisa, please.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And I know we said this was going to be an informal conversation, and that's why probably I cannot share my screen at the moment, but I had prepared a few slides to have this talk with you. So I'm not sure if Felipe is still there and he can maybe enable me to share my screen. Otherwise, I will just flow and continue with this, but that's just, and while we're on that, I would just like to clarify one thing, because Flavia also corrected her credentials. I'm not a partner at Justin Pereira Oliveira Talamini, unfortunately. I'm an associate, but since you were expecting a partner, Cesar promised he'll also jump into our discussions and give some of his comments on the substance of my presentation. So yeah, that is that. And also as to the Visist organization, I'm so happy to be here. That's actually how I met my boss, Cesar, at the Visist quite a few years ago. And I would have much rather have this virtual cocktail at Lan Kwai Fong, but unfortunately we cannot be. So for supporting this virtual event, thank you, Iber China, the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators in both their Southeast and Brazil branch, and CAMSA CVC, obviously, who's also supporting this kind of initiative, and my own beloved law firm, Justin Pereira Oliveira Talamini, for also supporting this. I'm not sure if now I can share my screen. Apparently not, but okay, yeah, let's flow. I had some cool slides, but they'll stay for another time. So just to position ourselves here, we're dealing with investments in Latin America. And when we talk about investment disputes within a Latin American context, I think the first thing that comes to mind is investment arbitration in Latin America. because we hear so much about these cases versus Venezuela, versus Ecuador, versus Bolivia, versus Uruguay. They're all top ICSID cases that developed great case law on investment treaty and investment protection in general. And for a long time, Brazil used to be a huge outlier in this system. But in the past few years, also a few of the countries that used to be signatories of the Washington Convention that established the ICSID, which is the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, they also denounced the convention. So they withdrew from the convention, those being Ecuador, Venezuela, and Bolivia, and they're not part of the system anymore. So that was a political decision on Brazil's side to not be part of the broader ISDS system. Has that harmed Brazil overall? Probably not. Brazil's still a frequent recipient of foreign investments and investors. You see, we have Gustavo here. It's a clear example on how foreign companies are coming to Brazil to invest. So Brazil has still been receiving investments regardless of being a part of this broader system. Would that have increased the number of investors coming to Brazil? We cannot know for a fact, but we do have experience knowing that the investors are already here. So when you go to Brazil, we don't find Washington Convention, we don't find BITs, but we do find the New York Convention in Fort. And within the Latin American context, we also have the Panama Convention on International Commercial Arbitration. And we have the Brazilian Arbitration Act, which is probably the most relevant statute for my part of the presentation on this topic. So our Brazilian Arbitration Act is largely inspired on the UNCITRAL model law, which means we have incorporated most of the literally of the main principles of international arbitration. So we have obviously party autonomy, we have severability, we have competence. That's all in our Arbitration Act, and that would be clearly similar to what a foreign investor would expect in arbitration in any other jurisdiction. So we can guarantee that also is in fact enforced in Brazil. And what is different about the BAA in contrast with the UNCITRAL model law is that we adopt a monist system. So our Brazilian Arbitration Act will govern both international arbitration or domestic arbitrations that take place in Brazil. So if the seat is Brazil, regardless of there being a foreign element, regardless of it being purely domestic, the BAA will apply yes or yes, since we're in Latin America. And coming to my point, and also because I really wanted Gustavo to be happy with us because he's dealing with so many concessions, and we wanted to focus here on what investors would expect when they're in relationships with the government, and if arbitration, as we all agreed here, as being the most effective means of dispute resolution, would be available as a dispute resolution mechanism for these types of contracts as well. So as of 2015, we have a broad and general authorization for any government entity in Brazil to arbitrate disputes that relate to what the law says, disposable economic rights. So we don't have any restriction on the subjective arbitrability of government states. But was the 2015 law a new possibility? Was that what brought the possibility of the Brazilian state arbitrating disputes? No, that was historically acceptable. So the Brazilian state has been borrowing funds from multilateral development banks to develop projects in Brazil. The form contracts of these that comes with these agreements, they usually provide for arbitration. So within those sectors, arbitration has been historically applied. We have the 2004 PPP regulations. The general law and concessions also provided for arbitration. We had the port law as of 2013 also having specific provisions regarding to arbitration. So that was a possibility, but because of disputes that happened within specific cases and also scholarly disputes for a while, the issue was debatable. So in the legislative reform of 2015, that became expressed in the law, and hopefully that will ease the amount of conflicts relating to the possibility of having arbitration with state entities in Brazil. But we still see some of those. They're usually not successful on the issue that the party is invoking to object. the arbitrability of disputes with the government. So we consider that a past now. That's a past issue. We shouldn't have any issues regarding that possibility anymore. So how is the arbitration involving state entities in Brazil different from traditional ISDS arbitration within the ICSID or BIT investment treaty-based arbitration context? First of all, it's not treaty-based. It will be contract-based. So you need a specific relationship with the government to be able to arbitrate with them. There's no open offer to arbitrate in general. So you will depend on the existence of an arbitration agreement, be it in the form of a submission agreement or in the form of an arbitration clause in a contract, a concession contract, usually. And in these disputes, naturally, there won't be discussions of treaty claims. So you won't be discussing, as Ivan was saying, MFN clauses, fair and equitable treatment. That won't be a part of the discussion. You'll be discussing the contract and whatever rules that are applicable to that contract. And in addition to that, it would be largely similar to ordinary commercial arbitration between private parties. But yeah, so why are we having this whole conversation if it's just similar to a regular arbitration between private parties? Because the Brazilian government is also subject to specific rules. They're mostly coming from the Brazilian constitutional, so we call them constitutional law principles that guide the administrative activity. These are duties that the Constitution imposes on the government in whatever level, and that wouldn't usually apply to a relationship exclusively between private parties. So these rules, these principles may have an impact in the arbitration process and change it from the original ordinary procedure that is an arbitration between private parties. But a thing that exists in Brazil is procedural prerogatives. If you're dealing with civil procedure, the government will usually have, let's say,
I think we lost Luisa for a while.
Yeah. Cesar, do you want to, so I will present you and you want to take?
Yeah. Well, we are actually approaching our end here. So while Luisa gets back, I was just going to comment that I'm not going to speak at length because, well, first of all, I have been making a lot of comments, so I probably used up all my time already. But in addition, we have covered everything that's really important. And what Luisa was just saying is that we have put in place in Brazil a system of commercial contract-based arbitration with state parties that provides, even if based on contract and not on treaty, provides a very strong and sound protection for foreign investments. And not only foreign investments. That's a very important point in the webinar that CBC offered yesterday. That point was very well discussed. We what Luisa was talking about now, our administrative law in Brazil provides for rights of foreign investors that are pretty much the same as those of domestic investors. One of the main purposes of investment protection treaties, which is to entitle foreign investors to national treatment, that's already embedded in our constitution. All the rights to fair treatment, they are also embedded in our constitution. So the whole package of investment protection is guaranteed by Brazilian administrative law. In the means to enforce those rights is now I would say very strongly guaranteed also by the wide acceptance of arbitration and other dispute resolution methods with Brazilian state parties. And so subject to some of the problems that Gustavo mentioned and Luis Eduardo mentioned with regard to the reality that we have to deal sometimes with courts to enforce awards, the means to enforce the rights in terms of arbitration or other dispute resolution methods are available in Brazil. So I will. That was just what I wanted to add to what Luisa was saying. I know that we now have Luisa and her presentation, and so I'll just give the floor back to Luisa for her to conclude. Thank you.
Yes, I don't know if you've realized, but I have Alex's name now because I had to use his link to get back, because when I was using mine, I was coming back as a guest. So, and Alex actually has the power to share his screen. Thomas, I don't know why you didn't give me that power. I feel discriminated now, but I'm glad that I have it now. So I'll speed up a little bit on where we were on constitutional.
Luisa, just so that you don't think you are being discriminated, I don't have that power either. That
Okay.
was,
sorry, technical problems.
It's probably granted to Alex only.
Yes. So this constitutional rules change a little bit of the process that the administrative entities or state entities will face when they're in arbitration. And because of the whole new generation of arbitrations involving state entities, we also have recent trends on arbitration involving state entities. They are mainly regulations that will happen either in sectoral laws, so they'll be applicable to specific sectors. So we have oil and gas, we have general energy, we have the port sector. They may have specific rules. We have PPPs with their specific rules. We have the general provisions on the concession law. But now there's also a trend of providing specific and institutional rules that govern the arbitration with the state entities that already encompass this concern about always needing to comply with constitutional rules. So basically, I am going to pass these more general slides that were here before, but we have the arbitration state entities generally governed by the Brazilian Arbitration Act, and then there we have also this ancillary rules that we always need to be mindful of. But what could be so different then in this different arbitration with state entities? First of all, we also have to mind that state entities in general are subject to public monitoring and control. We're talking about Tribunal de Contas here, the Court of Accounts. And in that sense, the very choice of arbitration in a government contract, providing for arbitration in the tender documents, may impact the accounts of a government entity itself. So this is more for public officials to be mindful of. So when you're choosing arbitration, you should always mind that there is an economic aspect behind an arbitration agreement also. And the compliance with the arbitration awards may also affect the accounts of that public, and the Court of Accounts may also be overseeing that. But always remember, the jurisdiction of the Court of Accounts is not the same jurisdiction that the arbitral tribunal has. So these are different things. They have control over their accounts. They do not have control over the merits of the disputes or over that contract in general. Another issue is the enforceability of the arbitration agreement in that award. How do I guarantee my arbitration agreement with the state will be valid? By being conscious and aware of all the rules that may affect your agreement. So if you're in the port sector, look at the port law and make sure your arbitration agreement complies with all the requirements so you don't have trouble with that later. And then be mindful of all these constitutional principles throughout the proceedings so that later the state entity cannot challenge your award based on violation of these constitutional principles in the arbitration. Choosing arbitrators and arbitral institutions, this is more of a Brazilian focused concern. Generally in Brazil, every procurement, every contract, every procurement by the government will have to be submitted to a tender process. That is not applicable when we're talking about choice of arbitrators or choice of arbitral institutions. Because we have very little time, I'll refer you to an article by our founding partner, Marcel Justin Filio, on this issue that refers to the inapplicability of the whole public procurement rules when we're talking about choice of arbitrators and choice of arbitral institution. But if you are a public official, yes, you have to always remember that all your acts need to be substantiated and motivated. So choose them wisely in your contract or in your arbitration. Also, bearing the costs. Investors, you unfortunately, sometimes, depending on the applicable rules, you may need to advance the costs. Does that mean that the investor will carry all the burden of dealing with the administrative costs? That may be the case if you don't succeed on the merits. But this is merely, these provisions are really merely advanced provisions. So if then the investor prevails on the merits, the arbitral tribunal will likely award them award on costs. And another issue concerns transparency, because we're dealing with government activity. So usually in a regular arbitration, you would always have the option of choosing it to be confidential. That is not an option when you're dealing with arbitration involving state entities in Brazil. Does that mean that the investor will have to go out and just distribute leaflets to everyone saying they're in an arbitration with the state? No, it's not their burden. That's on the government. The government needs to provide for publicity for that act. Does that mean everybody can come to the hearing? Also, no, that wouldn't be practicable, but they have to provide a reasonable publicity to that. And even though it's not their duty, the arbitral institutions in Brazil are actually doing a great job providing for lists of the arbitration proceedings that they have involving the direct government. CAMC-CBC is a great example. That's in their website. You can easily access all arbitrations that are involving state entities in their webpage. Can you have access to the documents of the arbitration? No, you may request that to the relevant government entity if you spot an arbitration in their website. And then they will have the duty to provide that for you. And also, lastly, what could be different is seeing results. Gustavo was really concerned about seeing the money. I know that everybody in disputes want in the end. So how does that happen when you're dealing with Brazilian arbitration entities? First, if it was a foreign-based arbitration, then we will have to go to the Superior Court of Justice and recognize that award. But after that, awards in Brazil are equivalent to court judgments. And also arbitrators are equivalent to judges. So it would basically have the same effect as a court judgment issued against the government entities. But also the court judgments in Brazil are subject to specific constitutional rules for compliance. So there is a limit to voluntary compliance by government entities. So even if they're willing to comply and they don't want to challenge the arbitration procedure, if that award has an order ordering them to pay an amount of money, you may need to get in line and be paid through a sort of document that means you are entitled to get paid by the government. It's called precatórios. Depending on the level of government that issues that owes you the money, that may not take that long. If you're dealing with a PPP, you may be even paid faster, but in general, you have to comply with this. But these procedures are clearly set in the law. So there's a lot of certainty here. There may be an issue of time, but they are very clear and set forward in the law, and they will be just as equal as court judgments in Brazil. So that's the main thing. And if you want, you can always try and enforce the award abroad, but I think that would be equally hard. So yeah, precatórios may not be even that bad. So in conclusion, because we're 10 minutes past our time, if we're talking about arbitration in Brazil in general, you should not fear. It will be largely equal to what you expect of an arbitration in any other New York Convention jurisdiction. And if you're dealing with disputes with the government, we also provide a safe environment. It's not as broad or treaty-based as the ISDS treaty-based arbitrations, but we are New York Convention jurisdictions. Again, arbitrators are equal to judges. Arbitral awards are equal to court judgments. State entities are openly authorized to arbitrate, so your award will be enforceable, and you have clearly set procedures for enforcement. So that means only with consideration to this small different things, and in practice, they will be very small. arbitration state entities in Brazil is largely similar to commercial arbitration, and you shouldn't fear. So that's an option for investors too. And Gustavo also said he loves arbitration. He thinks it's the best. So I'm very confident now that foreign investors will also agree with me. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I know we're way past our time, so I apologize for that. But yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Luisa, for your presentation. Cesar, do you want to say something before we end our cocktail?
Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations, Luis, and thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for all your effort coming back to our cocktail here. And certainly the fact that I was able to meet you and hook you to our firm through the Vis East is one of the main reasons, if not the most important reason, why I'm so grateful to Vis East for the opportunities that it has provided me. So it's a very important moment for me with regard to Vis East. When I met you, I think it was back in 2014 or something like that. I'm not going to go there. All right. So I'd like to ask you something. You talked about this impersonal, objective choice of arbitrators in arbitral institutions by the government. We, as you know, we will probably have, well, we will certainly have, and we will probably have in that new public procurement law a provision specifically dealing with that, right? With the objective choice of arbitrators. Do you think that new provision will change anything, or is that something that is already embedded, as you said, in the context of how state entities deal with choosing arbitral institutions and in choosing arbitrators? Do you see any prospective change with the new law, or is that something that's already being developed in practice in Brazil?
I mean, I'm not a public official to talk from their perspective, but I think any law that provides further regulation on an issue that has raised discussion will probably be more reassuring for a government official in that position to make a choice, because most of the times, and I had the opportunity to participate in a course that was taking place within the attorney's office of at the state, the attorney state for the São Paulo state, and they are concerned about not being motivated, not providing for enough motivation. They're concerned about everything that they do that may imply an oversight by the Court of Accounts. So they're already taking that consideration. In São Paulo, there is a general guideline, a legal opinion by their own attorneys saying how they should pick the arbitrators in a way that is neutral and that they can have sufficient motivation. So they are always being concerned about how to not get in trouble, how to not comply with principles. And when you add additional regulations, I think that just makes it more perceivable for them. So it's tangible now. They will have further regulations, so it probably make their lives easier. But I don't see like why in general, because probably these objective requirements are based on the same principles. You have to motivate. There must be a reason why we're choosing that arbitration. We also have the whole at the state level, the states were regulating and providing this kind of accreditation to some of the arbitral institutions. So that was already kind of a trend. So I think that's just going to be more useful for the public officials. So I'm glad we're not, as private lawyers, in that position to have to justify so much. We have to justify to our clients reasonably, and we also always do our research on the arbitrators. And I think it coming like in a private practice, you all probably do it more. Like we research so much on the arbitrators before we appoint them, because there must be a reason. And I think on the other side, they're doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's interesting what you said. Sometimes we complain about bureaucracy, but we forget that bureaucracy has a purpose, and that it can have some benefits, and that's probably one. When we started to have regulations on arbitration, probably around 2011 with the Minas Gerais law, and then later 2015 with some decrees. Probably our first approach was to complain about that and say, no, that's going to be over-regulated now. But it's a very important point that you make, that public officials feel more confident to rely on arbitration when they know precisely what they have to do, and they don't fear, and they don't have to fear stepping out of the track that's already accepted and everything. So I think it's a very important point that will it may provide even more safety for public officials to rely on arbitration. And I think it's interesting to see, especially in the past few years, how the state parties in Brazil are engaging in arbitration very enthusiastically, not anymore as something that they have to accept, live with because investors want, but as something that the government sees as positive, as efficient, as a way to get problems solved so that investments can move forward. And so I think we are on a very good track in Brazil with regard to arbitration with state parties. Thank you. And Thomas, before I turn back to you, I would just like to make very brief remarks about one thing. We talked about this need to, I think Gustavo mentioned that, and many of the speakers did, the need to engage more with Asia, know more about these different legal systems, and be more aware of that environment. And as you know, I'm the chair of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators in Brazil, and I would like to just make a quick comment here about how the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators can be a platform for that. And a good illustration is that tomorrow we will have a similar event to this one, another virtual cocktail that's going to be offered jointly by the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Brazil branch and the East Asia branch, which covers China also, and many other East Asia countries. And I would like to take the opportunity to invite you to join us tomorrow for this other virtual cocktail and learn more about how the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators can be, since it's such a large global network, can be a platform for that type of engagement. And so I would like to thank all the speakers, thank all of the participants, and thank IBRA China again for putting together this event, and turn the floor back to Thomas for his final remarks. Thank you all.
Thank you, Cesar. Well, once again, I want to thank the organization of the East v. Smooth, CAM-CCBC, IBRA China, Professor and Doctor and friend Cesar Guimarães, thank you a lot. And also our participants, Flávia Rocha, Alex Ivanko, Gustavo Guedes, thank you, Dr. Luis Vidal also, and Doutora Luisa. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time, Professor Cesar. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye, Professor Thomas.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.